By the summer of 1987, the world was asking one question. Could Michael Jackson possibly top Thriller? Thriller wasn't just an album, it was a phenomenon. It had sold in numbers nobody thought possible. It broke racial barriers on MTV, turning music videos into an art form. It gave the world Billie Jean, Beat It, and the Thriller short film that sent shockwaves across pop culture. Michael wasn't just a superstar. He was the most famous man on earth, an artist whose fame rivaled the Beatles at their peak and Elvis in his prime. But Michael wasn't interested in repeating the past. He wanted to go bigger, sharper, and bolder. Bad was conceived as not only a follow-up, but a transformation. It was the first album Michael fully co-produced, allowing him more control than ever. He wrote deeper lyrics, infused with attitude and personal vision. The leather-clad cover, the harder edge, the darker themes, all of it reflected a man stepping into a new era, leaving behind the wide-eyed Thriller years for something tougher, more confrontational. And when Bad was released on August 31st, 1987, it wasn't just an album drop. It was an event. Record stores were mobbed. Fans lined up overnight. News reports described Michael Madness, a frenzy reminiscent of Beatlemania but supercharged by the global reach of television. The results were historic. I Just Can't Stop Loving You, Bad, The Way You Make Me Feel, Man in the Mirror, and Dirty Diana each went straight to #1. 5 consecutive #1 singles, something no one had ever achieved before. Not Elvis, not the Beatles, not Madonna, only Michael Jackson. And the tour? Pure chaos. Nearly every date sold out in minutes. Fans fainted by the dozens. Police barricades broke under the pressure of screaming crowds. At one point in Japan, 1.3 million tickets sold out instantly. In Europe, cities went on high alert every time the Bad tour rolled through. Michael wasn't just performing, he was sparking hysteria. Critics and insiders understood immediately. Bad wasn't just another successful pop album, it was a cultural moment, a shift in the atmosphere of music. Michael had turned a record into an all-encompassing global experience. So as Grammy season approached, the conclusion seemed obvious. Michael wasn't just in the running, he was the runner. Everyone expected Bad to dominate. Everyone thought history would repeat the Thriller sweep. But the Recording Academy had other plans. The Grammys loved to present themselves as the most prestigious night in music, the place where artistry, talent, and excellence are honored above all else. But behind the curtain, the reality has always been more complicated, and Michael Jackson had already learned this lesson. Flashback to 1984, Thriller was unstoppable. It was more than an album. It was a global takeover, 7 top 10 singles, MTV airplay that broke down racial barriers. The moonwalk had become the most famous dance move on the planet. By every measurable standard, Thriller was the greatest album of its era. Everyone expected it to win Album of the Year. How could it not? It was the most obvious, unanimous choice the Academy had ever faced. And yet, the award went to Lionel Richie's Can't Slow Down. Lionel was a respected musician. His album was strong, but compared to Thriller, it wasn't even close. Fans around the world were shocked. Even Richie himself looked stunned as he accepted the award. Michael did win that night. In fact, he won big. 8 Grammys, including Record of the Year and Best Male Pop Vocal. It was a historic sweep. But the one that mattered most, the crown jewel, had been withheld. Album of the Year. And so whispers spread. Whispers that the Recording Academy didn't want to give too much power to one man, that they didn't want a young black superstar to sweep every single award, that Michael's dominance frightened them. That night planted a seed. Michael had already felt the sting of being denied what he had earned. And by 1989, that seed would grow into something even more bitter. The night of February 22, 1989, was supposed to be Michael Jackson's coronation. The Grammys buzzed with anticipation. Journalists were already drafting their headlines. Michael's Bad had shattered expectations, rewritten records, and conquered the globe. Who else could possibly win Album of the Year? Michael himself arrived in style, his presence electrifying the room. Cameras lingered on him as the night went on, fans watching closely for the moment they all assumed would come. The king of pop, holding his crown jewel. Then came the moment. The envelope was brought out, the room hushed. And the Grammy goes to George Michael for Faith. The silence was deafening. Gasps broke out. Even George Michael seemed caught off guard as he walked to the stage. He accepted with humility, thanking his team. But everyone in the room knew this wasn't supposed to happen. Michael sat still, expression tight, emotions unreadable. But those close to him would later say the wound was deep. For the second time in 5 years, the Academy had denied him its highest honor. It wasn't just a loss, it was a humiliation on live television in front of the entire world. George Michael's Faith was no lightweight. It was a solid, soulful pop record. It had hits. It sold millions. It marked his successful transition from teen idol to serious solo artist. But could it really compete with Bad? The truth is, the two albums weren't even in the same category. Faith was sleek, radio-friendly, and safe. It fit neatly into the Academy's comfort zone. It was respectable, grounded in musicianship, and easy to digest. Bad was something else entirely. It was bold. It was theatrical. It was dangerous. It didn't just aim for radio, it aimed for history. Michael's short films, his choreography, his visual style, his record-breaking singles, they were unlike anything the music industry had ever seen. One was an album. The other was a cultural revolution. And yet, the revolution lost to the safe choice. Why did this happen? The truth is uncomfortable. The Recording Academy had long favored what it called real musicians, a phrase that meant artists who wrote their own songs, played their instruments, and fit traditional molds of artistry. And while Michael wrote and co-produced, while he was deeply involved in every note of his work, his art looked different. It was cinematic, it was theatrical, it was built for arenas, not smoky jazz clubs. To the old guard, that wasn't authenticity, that was spectacle. And then there was the issue of race. Michael Jackson was the most successful black entertainer in history. His fame was unmatched, his dominance unprecedented. But in the halls of the Academy, that wasn't celebrated. It was feared. Prince had been snubbed. Whitney Houston overlooked. Even Lionel Richie's earlier victory over Thriller had raised suspicions. By 1989, the pattern was clear. The Academy had a problem with pop, a problem with spectacle, and a problem with crowning Michael Jackson as the undisputed king. So when Faith emerged, safe and familiar, it became the perfect alternative. The trophy didn't go to the most deserving, it went to the most comfortable. Michael Jackson never exploded in public. He never lashed out at the Grammys in interviews. He never trashed the Academy on stage. But behind the scenes, those close to him say he was devastated. Bad was more than an album. It was his personal evolution. For the first time, he had taken full creative control. He co-produced. He pushed boundaries in sound and vision. It wasn't just music. It was his soul, his identity, his artistry laid bare. To have that overlooked, not on artistic grounds, but on politics and bias, was devastating. Friends later recalled that Michael felt betrayed. To him, the Grammys weren't just snubbing his music, they were rejecting him, his evolution, his vision, his artistry. And so Michael responded in the only way he knew how, with silence and distance. In the years that followed, he rarely attended Grammy ceremonies. When he did win, his speeches were brief, detached, stripped of emotion. He had learned a powerful truth. The Grammys weren't about recognizing greatness. They were about controlling it. And Michael Jackson wasn't about to let anyone control him again. After the shocking 1989 Grammy loss, Michael Jackson's perspective on the music industry and its institutions began to shift in profound ways. For most of his career, he had believed that talent, discipline, and innovation would be enough to guarantee recognition. He worked tirelessly, rehearsed until exhaustion, and pushed himself creatively to deliver music and performances that set new benchmarks for the entire entertainment world. He had given everything to Bad, treating it not just as a follow-up to Thriller, but as a defining statement about who he had become as an artist. And yet, the Recording Academy had denied him once again. In that moment, he realized that success in the music industry wasn't always about excellence or even influence. It was about politics. It was about the people in the room, the gatekeepers, and what they were willing or unwilling to celebrate. And to them, Michael Jackson had become too big, too dominant, too impossible to ignore. So they tried to ignore him. Instead of chasing trophies, Michael began chasing something that the Grammys could never give him and could never take away: control. In the wake of the snub, he reoriented his career around ownership and independence. He began thinking like not just an artist, but a mogul. He doubled down on the importance of owning his catalog and masters, ensuring that the music he created would always belong to him. His business acumen shocked the industry when he acquired the ATV catalog, which included the entire Beatles songbook, a move that forever changed the way artists thought about publishing rights. To critics, it seemed almost outrageous. To insiders, it was genius. Michael had made himself untouchable in a way no Grammy could ever match. He was building an empire. At the same time, he poured himself into reinventing his art. When Dangerous arrived in 1991, it was not the sound of a man defeated by rejection. It was the sound of a man reborn. He teamed up with Teddy Riley to bring new jack swing into the mainstream, blending R&B, hip-hop beats, and pop melodies into a sound that defined the early 90s. With songs like Black or White, Remember the Time, Heal the World, and Who Is It?, Michael reminded the world that he was still pushing boundaries. He used his platform to speak out about issues larger than himself: racism, poverty, greed, injustice. And once again, he redefined what a music video could be. Remember the Time played like a Hollywood blockbuster, complete with costumes, choreography, and A-list actors. Black or White sparked controversy with its raw edge and social commentary. Every release felt like an event. Michael wasn't chasing awards anymore, he was chasing history, and history was following him. Meanwhile, George Michael, the man who walked away with the Grammy that night in 1989, was entering a far more complicated chapter of his career. On the surface, his victory seemed like a crowning moment. Faith had been a massive commercial success, selling millions worldwide and earning him credibility as a serious solo artist. The Grammy should have launched him into a new stratosphere. But behind the scenes, things began to unravel. He clashed bitterly with his record label over creative control, frustrated with the industry's attempt to pigeonhole him into a marketable pop mold. His follow-up projects struggled to replicate the meteoric success of Faith, particularly in the United States, where his visibility declined rapidly. By the mid-1990s, George Michael had begun retreating from the spotlight, battling industry politics and personal struggles that prevented him from sustaining the momentum of his early career. The irony was striking. The artist who had been handed the Grammy went on to fight uphill battles that limited his influence, while the artist who had been snubbed continued to define the sound and vision of modern pop. George Michael had the trophy, but Michael Jackson had the legacy. As the years passed, the truth about that Grammy night began to leak out. Former Recording Academy voters and insiders admitted that some had deliberately voted against Michael. Not because they didn't believe in the artistic merit of Bad. How could they not, when it was the biggest cultural force of the era? But because they felt Michael had already won enough. Others dismissed his work as too commercial, a phrase that often masked deeper resentment of his global influence and superstardom. Some voters openly preferred artists who fit the Academy's traditional mold, those who played their own instruments, wrote every lyric themselves, and stayed rooted in genres like rock, soul, or jazz, which the old guard considered real music. Michael's dazzling spectacle, his larger-than-life performances, and his blending of high art with pop culture made him an outsider in their eyes, no matter how revolutionary his contributions were. Quincy Jones, Michael's longtime producer and collaborator, never minced words when asked about the Grammys. Though he didn't directly call the Academy corrupt, he expressed frustration at its tendency to overlook transformative artists. He once described the ceremony as more of a political popularity contest than a genuine recognition of excellence, and his frustration was echoed by many in the industry who had seen the same biases at play with other artists: Prince, Whitney Houston, Marvin Gaye. Again and again, Black artists and pop visionaries were sidelined in favor of safer, more traditional choices. Even George Michael himself seemed to recognize the shadow hanging over his Grammy win. In later interviews, he rarely spoke about the award and almost seemed to avoid celebrating it. It wasn't his fault, of course. He hadn't engineered the politics of the Recording Academy, but he seemed to understand that his victory came with an asterisk, forever tied to what many considered one of the greatest snubs in Grammy history. Music historians now consistently rank Michael Jackson's 1989 loss as one of the Academy's most glaring mistakes. Retrospective articles, documentaries, and fan discussions often cite it as proof of how out of touch the Grammys can be. The consensus is almost unanimous. Bad was the superior album. It was more ambitious. It was more innovative. It was more impactful on the culture. It redefined what a pop record could achieve, blending music, visuals, choreography, and global spectacle into something never seen before. By comparison, Faith was a strong album, but it didn't shift the foundations of the music industry. It didn't inspire generations of performers. It didn't change the landscape of pop. The Grammys had chosen comfort over revolution, and in doing so, they had tarnished their own credibility. But in the end, the snub did not diminish Michael Jackson. It only sharpened him. It forced him to stop chasing validation from institutions that had no intention of recognizing him fairly. It taught him that true greatness was not measured in trophies, but in ownership, innovation, and cultural influence. And that is exactly what Michael achieved in the decades that followed. While Grammys gather dust on shelves, Michael's music continues to live, breathe, and inspire. Bad is still celebrated as one of the greatest albums of all time. Its songs are played daily across the globe. Its videos are studied by filmmakers. Its tour remains legendary. Fans don't remember who won Album of the Year in 1989. They remember the songs that shaped their lives. Michael Jackson may have walked out of the Grammys that night empty-handed, but in the long run, he didn't lose anything. He gained perspective. He gained control. He gained the insight that true immortality doesn't come from the Recording Academy. It comes from the people, from the fans, from the culture. And culture chose Michael. Today, when we look back, the lesson is crystal clear. George Michael may have had the Grammy, but Michael Jackson had the crown. The Recording Academy lost credibility that night. Michael Jackson lost a trophy, but he gained everything that truly matters. The knowledge that his art had outgrown awards, that his legacy was untouchable, and that history would always remember him not as the artist who was snubbed, but as the king of pop who could not be denied.